Hey everyone, my name is Kendrick Diaz and this is Verse by Verse, a short podcast all about exploring the insights and lessons of the inspired Word of God. Have you ever written a paper or done an assignment that took hours to do only to get a failing grade because you didn't follow the instructions correctly? It stings pretty badly, but there's a huge lesson in that. If it's happened to you, you probably learned, painfully I should say, the importance of carefully reading all the instructions and following them to the T. Making sure all your bases are covered and that you did exactly what you were supposed to do. This should have been the lesson the Pharisees and Sadducees learned when Jesus was conducting his ministry, but Jesus gave them a failing grade on their form of worship. Why? Because they didn't follow all of the instructions that God originally gave them. So let's see what he told them in Matthew chapter 15, verses 8 through 9. Christ said, "These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men." I want to focus on that last verse, verse 9. I'll read it again in the New Living Translation. Christ said, "Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God." See, they ignored the real commandments of God, the ones that he gave Moses, in favor of their own thing. Their own rules and laws based on their own reasoning with their own application. And Jesus was very forward with them. He didn't pull any punches. He said that kind of worship is useless. It's pointless. It doesn't at all accomplish what God intends. It'd be a little like if your employer were to come up to you and ask, "Did you finish that project I assigned you?" And you say, "Sure did." And then what you show him is nothing like what he was wanting at all. Would he be proud? Would he thank you and go on his way? No, he'd be so displeased. He may even say, "You're out of here because you don't do what I tell you to do." Now, Jesus wasn't necessarily casting them off for good, don't get me wrong, but he was making the point that their whole approach was wrong. See, when God originally gave Israel his laws, they were one complete package. His laws were a gift to humanity when we really think about it. It was divine revelation on the rules of life, which tell us how to live properly in a way that produces blessings, in a way that avoids heartache and misery and suffering, a way of life that tells us how to be at peace with ourselves, with others, how to be at peace with God. But the Pharisees and Sadducees, see, they tried to improve on what God gave. They injected their own opinions and theories. They annulled some of his laws in favor of their own. So by the time Jesus was on the scene, the laws that God originally gave had a completely different look. Now that's important because so many people out there seem to think that Jesus was doing away with the laws in the Old Testament. Not true. He was doing away with the version they had become because of what the religious leaders did, but he wasn't condemning the laws themselves. See, the Pharisees and Sadducees should have learned that you can't improve on God. You can't do it. So, okay, let me use an analogy. Imagine if someone were to give you the perfect car. And when I say perfect, I mean absolutely perfect. And then imagine if you came home one day and you saw someone and he propped open the hood and he was changing this, adding that, modifying the other thing. What would you say? You'd probably say, "What are you doing? This was perfect." And indeed, the laws that God gave Moses were perfect. So what's the takeaway from this verse? Well, we need to make sure that we're following all of God's instructions and not thinking that we can somehow help God by modifying it, by changing it so that it's more relevant to the 21st century. You know, it doesn't hurt to ask ourselves questions about how we worship God. Is my worship based on man-made traditions? Is my worship selective? Is it partial to certain commandments I don't like? Am I following all of his instructions? See, Matthew chapter 15, verse 9 reminds us that God has standards, and he hasn't left it up to us to decide how we worship him. He tells us exactly what he wants us to do. And if we have the desire to listen, we'll see that it's the most fulfilling and rewarding thing we can do. We shouldn't want Christ to say this about us. We shouldn't want him to say, "He worships me in vain." We should want him to say one day, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
If you've been enjoying Verse by Verse and want to help the show grow, here's what you can do to get the word out. Wherever you're listening, make sure to subscribe. If you're on a platform that accepts reviews and ratings, those can both make a big difference in helping other people find us. Verse by Verse is a companion podcast to the Daily Bible Verse blog, which you can find on the Life, Hope, and Truth Learning Center. Check out the show notes for more.